Hey, Lisa Piggott here with the Urban Harvest, and today we are going to go over 5 different cover crops for your summer vegetable garden. Cover crops are critical in the summer months. If you choose not to actively grow food in your garden beds, whether you're away for the summer months or whether you just plain old don't want to garden in the heat, that's perfectly fine. But you need to sow a cover crop, which are plants that need little to no care from you, into your garden beds over the summer months so that you can avoid a ton of issues that summer can bring. There are 5 things that cover crops can help your garden with over the summer months with no effort from you. Number 1, they help control weeds. When you have a dense planting of cover crops in your garden beds, you are not going to come back in fall to a overgrown mess. Dense planting of cover crops will shade out and practically eliminate weeds in your garden beds. The second thing that it can do for your garden is to protect your soil. In the summer months, if you leave your garden bed exposed, you are going to have the sun baking down on it, which can destroy your soil ecosystem, and you are going to have heavy rains leaching all of the nutrients that you have worked so hard to put into your garden straight through the soil and out of the beds. When you put in a cover crop, it helps to reduce the sun and rain through the garden bed so that you do not lose all of those hard-won ecosystem benefits and nutrients that you've put into the garden beds. The third thing that it can do is not only can it help retain those nutrients, but it can potentially, depending on which cover crops you put into the beds, put nutrients back into the soil. It's called fixation, where it's actually taking nutrients like nitrogen out of the air and putting it into your garden beds. The fourth thing it can help with is attracting beneficial insects. So this can be pollinators, or this could be parasitic wasps and ladybugs and lacewings. When you have something growing year-round, you're helping to establish a healthy ecosystem. If we go completely barren for 3 to 4 or even 5 months out of the year and expect all of these helpful insects to stay in our yard, we're mistaken. We have to have a food source around for them year-round if we want them to be here year-round. The last thing that cover crops can help with is compaction. So when we have something growing in our soil, the roots and everything are worked into the soil and they're helping to support the soil structure. So going back to how no cover crops can lead to the soil being depleted, baked in the sun, washed out by the rain. If we're leaving it exposed, all of the soil gets really heavy and compacted and settled. When we have plants growing, the roots in the plants help to maintain the soil structure so that it is nice and rich and light for your garden come fall. Cowpeas are a wonderful cover crop for the summer months. And probably one of the top things with them is they are a nitrogen fixer. Most plants take nutrients out of the soil. Legumes, which is beans and peas, actually put nutrients into the soil. So by planting these, you're actually helping nitrogen get back into the soil. So think of it basically as a fertilizer or a soil amendment that you're adding into your garden. So by planting these, we're actually preparing the garden beds with nutrients for the coming growing season. Obviously, you also have food that you can harvest from them as an added bonus. Cowpeas are things like black-eyed peas or whippoorwills, one of my favorite varieties, also purple hull, pink eye. And the other benefit to planting cowpeas in the garden, it's kind of counterintuitive, but think of it almost as a trap crop. Cowpeas will get covered in aphids every single time. And rather than think of it as something to fight or battle, just embrace it. as scary as it may seem, and allow the aphids to exist. You will still get tons of food from it, but by leaving it and not trying to eliminate the aphids, you're drawing in beneficial insects to the garden and to the area, so that when it comes time to plant for fall, you already have ladybugs and lacewings and everything else buzzing happily around because you've already given them an abundant food source. You may question whether it's going to kill the cowpeas. I can guarantee you it won't. The aphids are attracted to the cowpeas because they are high in nitrogen, which is why it's putting it into the soil. But they are also incredibly resilient and plants, so they will not succumb to aphid pressure like some of your other plants may in the fall and winter months. The next cover crop to consider for your summer garden beds is marigolds. It is one that doesn't need any care from you, and it's a beautiful, joyous way to fill your garden. You'll have lots of cheery blooms the entire summer long. What it can do for your garden over those months, besides your basic cover crop benefits, they can deter nematodes. And I want to delve a little bit into this because there are some misconceptions here. There are chemical compounds within the marigolds that have been proven to reduce nematode populations. But, and it's a big but, it's not just from planting it next to a nematode sensitive crop, say tomatoes. If you plant your marigold next to the tomatoes, it's not necessarily going to repel the nematodes. The benefits come from when you cut the marigold plant down and allow it to decompose in your soil. The other thing is, one plant's not going to do ya. You need a lot of marigolds to have any sort of nematode control. So it's definitely something to work in, but you do need to plant an entire carpet of marigolds to make a difference. If you're planting marigolds for nematode suppression, do make sure to plant either French or African marigolds. Over the summer months, French marigolds are actually ideal. They take the heat a little bit better than the African varieties. Sorghum is another crop that you can plant into the garden. You can see it here, and it is a grain, obviously. It is in the grass family, and it can help put in micronutrients back into the soil, but it also is going to attract pollinators from the flowering stage, if you allow it to go to flower. And it also does produce, technically, an edible grain. My family eats sorghum. We do not necessarily harvest it on a regular basis. I choose to feed it to my chickens because they absolutely love it. So if you have chickens, using this and our next cover crop is a really fun addition to the garden. All animals tend to graze on the grasses. My dog will walk by and munch on the young tender leaves on a regular basis. So it is definitely a fodder crop for a lot of different animals. So the sorghum is a taller plant, but it is not a very dense structure, so it's not going to shade your soil much. And you may have noticed that I actually have a lot of different cover crops growing in one space. That's called polyculture. So instead of having our nice neat rows of one plant and then another, we mix them all together. And by doing that, they all offer something different to the soil, and they all act and function in different ways within the garden bed. So this is not going to shade my soil very well, but it does help keep the soil nice and light, puts micronutrients back into the soil, and it acts as fodder crops for my livestock or dog. Our next cover crop is millets. Millet is another type of grass or green, and it can get, depending on the variety, quite tall. This is foxtail millet, and just like the sorghum, it is a great fodder crop if you have chickens, dogs, whatnot, but as far as what it can offer to our soil. Millet is a very fast growing cover crop. So you'll be able to seed it and have it grow in and fill in very quickly, which can be beneficial when you're comparing it to things like cowpeas, which may take a little bit longer to get growing and get started in the garden for cover crops. So these grasses, the sorghum and the millet, can actually act as a kind of trellis to help maintain the cowpeas within your garden beds. They're quite rambling if you allow them to crawl across the ground, so they will naturally find these tall supports and climb up them, allowing you to plant more plants in your garden beds without taking up as much space. Sunn Hemp is gaining in popularity as a cover crop over the summer months, even for commercial growers. Unlike the cowpeas, which crawl along the ground, this has much more of an upright growth habit, but just like the cowpeas, this fixes nitrogen, large amounts of nitrogen. So you are able to sow this in. It will help fix the nitrogen, taking it from the air, putting it into your soil over the summer months to replenish depleted soils. And it is also a fodder crop that you can feed to livestock and animals. And the nice thing about this is it's typically not going to go to seed here in Florida. Allowing things to go to seed can kind of shift things around as far as the purpose in your gardens. How do we use cover crops? When do you sow them? When do you remove them? And how does all of that work? The right time to plant them into your garden is whenever your garden beds are being pulled up for the summer months. So remember, this is supposed to help establish plants in your garden over the summer months. So depending on where you are in the state, what you were growing in the spring months, and when you're ready to call it quits is when you will put it in the ground. Remember, diversity is really, really beneficial here. So if at all possible, try to pick a couple, if not all, of these varieties or other cover crop options. I do have another video on cover crops for summer months that are all edible. So if you want to check out that video, make sure to check the link above. Pick a handful of those and direct sow them into the garden. There are no need for trays and starter pots or anything like that. Put them in the garden and they will grow. If you're planting in very early spring before the summer months and the summer rains get going, you will have to water a little bit just to get them established. Once your summer rains start, you do not need to worry about any of that. And you do not need to water as frequently as you would if you were trying to put in edible annual crops. After that, it is completely hands off. You do not need to check for pests. You do not need to manage for those pests, even if you do spot some. Let it go. Let it be. Let the ecosystem function as it's meant to function. Yes, there will be pests, but there will also be all of those wonderful beneficial insects that we look for in our gardens, doing the work for you over the summer months. It's time to pull them up when things are going to seed. So you can see above me, the sorghum and the millet have started to go to seed. And what happens when that process occurs is the plant starts to use up all of the stored energy. Making seeds, babies, plant babies, is a very intensive process. Just like we need to take our supplements and vitamins when we're pregnant, the plants are using a ton of additional resources. So if we're looking to capture and keep those nutrients in the soil that the plants have gathered for us, then we need to try to catch them before it's too far into the flowering and seeding stage. Now I do have several stages going in the garden here for demonstration purposes to show you all in this video. So at this point, there is no exact time, but in general, allowing the sorghum and the millet to get this far into the seeding process is not going to put as much nutrients into the soil. So you would definitely cut it at this point if you're not going to be consuming it for food. Ideally, you'll catch it right at that flowering stage. So what do you do when it's time to remove it? Cut it at the soil. Do not pull out the entire plant with the roots. If you do that, one, you're removing a lot of the nutrients. Two, you're disrupting the soil ecosystem. Don't pull it out, just cut it. Ideally, as long as things have not gone to seed, you will simply chop up and lay the cover crop over the soil at that point. What that is doing is allowing it to start decomposing and breaking down, and it's continuing to protect the soil from the sun and the heat and the rain. So once you cut it, you put it onto the soil. Ideally, you would wait about 2 weeks or so, and at that point you can bring in your additional soil, compost, soil amendments, whatever else you're going to be putting into the garden for fall, putting that soil in place, and then immediately planting your fall crops. In this way, you have plants growing year-round in the garden with very little maintenance, if any, from you over that hot period of time. I hope you found this informative on how to use cover crops in your summer vegetable garden here in Florida. If you found this video helpful, make sure to head on down below and give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and you'll be alerted every time a new video comes out on Florida vegetable gardening. Stay cool.